In part 15 of our build guide, we clean, paint, and prepare the donor parts. Get the brake booster ready to wash by first removing the foam. Early model boosters only have one piece of foam. Late model boosters have an additional piece of foam underneath the aluminum spacer. After removing the foam, reinstall the spacer and nuts. Next, install the master cylinder to keep water out of the booster while you wash it. Slide the vacuum hose onto the fitting and plug the end. Pry the brake pads out of the front calipers from your donor. Cap the fuel rail to keep water out. Also cover the throttle body and valve cover vent like you did before while stripping the donor. If your car is an automatic, disconnect the transmission lines by prying out the clips. Next, disconnect both radiator hoses. Lay the radiator down and disconnect the fan. Tape up the ends of the transmission lines to keep out water and debris. Soak the donor parts with a detergent like Super Clean. We like to start with full concentration from a spray bottle. Then we use the dispenser on the power washer to soak the parts again. Finally, we use high pressure to rinse the parts. Pry out the axles to remove them. Spray the O2 sensor with penetrating oil. Pull out the O2 sensor lock and disconnect the plug. Do the same for the second O2 sensor. Use a 22mm wrench to remove the first O2 sensor. Save the sensor to use later in your Goblin. Use a 15mm socket to remove the exhaust flange nuts. The studs might come out with the nuts. If they do, soak them in penetrating oil afterwards so you can loosen them later. Remove both heater hoses. It helps to break the hoses loose by pinching them with the pliers. Trim the first heater hose to loop the two heater tubes. Disconnect the EVAP line from the valve and intake manifold. Use a 10mm socket to remove the EVAP valve. Take off the oil filler cap and twist the filler neck extension to remove it. Then reinstall the cap. Use a 10mm socket to remove the transmission lines. Use a 13mm socket to remove the AC lines. Use a 3/8 ratchet to remove the serpentine belt. Disconnect the AC compressor plug and use a 13mm socket to remove the bolts. Remove the upper radiator hose. Use a 13mm socket to remove both of the lift loops. Remove the coolant overflow hose. Use a 15mm wrench to disconnect the powertrain ground. Reconnect the starter ground and tighten the nut. Cut the tape around the powertrain ground to remove it. Unwrap and untangle the MAF sensor wires to the other end of the valve cover. Tape the MAF sensor wires. Cover and tape the wires along the valve cover. Tape the speed sensor wires. Use a 10mm socket to remove the fuel line bracket. Remove the bellows and dust cover from the strut. Then tape the shaft to keep it from getting painted. Repeat for the other strut. Mark the springs one round up from the bottom. Clamp the springs and cut on your mark. You can use a grinder, hacksaw, or torch to cut the spring. Tape the brake booster opening, vacuum line fitting, and pushrod bellows. Use a 7mm socket to remove the brake pedal position sensor. The position sensor varies depending on the donor. Use a 10mm socket to remove the throttle pedal. Pull off the brake pedal pad. Remove the foam and nut from the brake pedal. Mark the fuel filler neck just before it narrows down. Mark the vent tube as shown. Clamp the filler neck to the table and cut at your marks. Deburr the tubes. The baffle in the filler neck will cause the tank to fill slowly. Late model baffles like this one are easy to knock out. Early model baffles are built in and will have to be cut out or replaced with a late model fuel neck. Hang and paint the donor parts. This is also a good time to paint the engine pulleys and valve cover. In the next video, we'll unpack and prepare the first stage kit parts.